Should we be concerned with our kids being too soft? How do we even begin to address this dilemma? Coddling, tough love, therapy. What do we do? When I was, I'm going to say in the fourth grade, we had tryouts for the school band, and a bunch of my peers signed up, including yours truly. I tried out for the clarinet, don't judge. So for the woodwind and brass instruments, the trial was you get 3 tries to make a loud sound with whatever instrument, you know, you're trying to get the part for. So, but what's weird is like till this day, I don't understand how that alone makes you a good candidate to play an instrument. I mean, shit, man, a fucking orangutan or an elephant can make a sound by blowing hard as they can into an instrument. So the long and short of it, I didn't make the cut. So now I'm upset, I'm emotional, and listen to this. I went home and deliberately had sourpuss face, and I'm pouting and I'm doing all this so my mother could see it. And because I knew that my sadness would bait my mother in to ask me what was wrong. You know, obviously she was very concerned with my education and my overall happiness, but she took the bait. And so I tell her the story of how I didn't make the cut for the band, and now she's pissed off because she knew how much I love music and she knew how much or how badly I want to play an instrument. So the next day she ends up coming to my school and she basically intimidated the music teacher and the principal into giving me another tryout. By and large, because my mother was a fucking gangster. That's just how it was. And people were intimidated by her. So then the music teacher gives me a private tryout after school. I think it was like the next day. And she was not happy about it. She had this Cersei Lannister scowl on her face, like she wanted to commit crimes against humanity on me. Like, no joke. She was pissed off. She had her mouth poked out. She was rolling her eyes at me, being very short and a little bit rude. And at the end of this, I'm going to say it was like a 10 or 15 minute tryout. I did better, air quotes, on this tryout. So now I'm in the band and I make it. And she says something like, well, if you would have done that yesterday, the first time, instead of acting like a baby and crying to your mother, we wouldn't be here now. So, okay. I got what I want. I kind of shrugged the insult off. She's basically calling me a bitch. There's no two ways about it. But as an adult, I have obviously a different reflection on the moment. And I can call myself out. I pulled a punk move. And my mother was an accessory to the crime. And the principal and the teachers were accessories also. They caved in to the pressure of my mother. So there's like 3 wrongs, or actually 4 if you're counting me. Like there's me crying about it, and then there's the 3 adults, my mother, the principal, and the teacher. I mean, maybe you can make an argument that the music instructor didn't do a good job of, explaining the rules of the tryout. I think what I needed to learn as a kid was to be creative in getting the things that you want, like being more clear on what the expectations were for the tryout, or just following up with the teacher afterwards. How come I didn't make it? How was I supposed to play to win a spot on the band? How would I be judged? So on and so forth. Like, I think what I needed was for that moment to sting so I could be more resourceful and better prepared for tryouts for the next year if I still want to do that. And not just for making that band, but for other life moments also. And I don't think it really matters that I was only 10 years old. Like, I think if I was smart enough to manipulate my mother into getting what I wanted, then I could have been smart enough to figure out how to perform better to make that tryout. And on a semi-related note, like 6 years after the fact, I tried out for a traveling basketball team when I was in high school, and I got cut after a 2-day tryout. And that moment stung like hell. Like I was embarrassed. Like I felt pretty shitty. But here's what happened. I evaluated my performance. I compared myself to the guys that actually did make that team. And I told myself, never again will I get cut from a tryout. And I didn't. Like I made every subsequent tryout after that for like the next 3 years. And I became actually a pretty good high school athlete. But a lot of it was, that moment of me failing that tryout for basketball was hard coded in my memory. It was a painful thing. And when it was time to perform for subsequent teams, I recalled on that memory as a motivational device. So why do I bring this all up? So we're talking about soft kids, and it's a thing nowadays with hypersensitivity and a whole lot of other issues. I tell that story because there's so much value in failing and disappointment and suffering as a child. And I think that's one of many reasons that that it makes so many great artists and so many great business leaders and humanitarians. They fail, they suffer, they have that pain as a point of reference. And I think it's that personal insight and I'm going to say familiarity to suffrage that drives higher awareness and decision making. So as a parent, I think in my opinion, it's important that children aren't strangers to pain and struggle. They got to know what physical pain is and emotional pain and romantic pain and so on and so forth. Pain by itself can't just be abstract in the mind of a child. It helps for development for a kid, or for pain rather, to be anecdotal. And as it was for me getting cut from that basketball team. So if you're a parent and you're one of these bulldozer or one of these helicopter parents overly protecting and coddling children, this could be problematic for the kid's personal development leading into adulthood. They can turn out soft. Like being a soft person is a real thing. It's not a derogatory term. Kids are soft. Some adults are soft. A soft kid may grow up to be a soft adult. My definition of softness speaks more to a particular fragility, whether it's physical fragility or mental fragility. And don't get it twisted. Anybody can be soft. You can be a muscle-bound man or woman, but be mentally soft. Conversely, you can be an impressive or actually an unimpressive physical specimen like MLK, Gandhi, or somebody like Mandela, but still be a mental titan the way they were. Right? And I wouldn't say either of those men look bad per se, but based on photos today, come on, neither one of those guys are going to be on the cover of Men's Health with their shirt off. But they were strong men. That's my point. And that's why I think it's tricky when people call for an all-out end to so-called bullying or teasing, or certain uses of language that triggers young people. Excluding mental torture, it's a kind of emotional pounding that forges steel, really and truly. Some of us, when we were coming up, we got destroyed with insults. We got destroyed sometimes with physical bullying. It was terrifying. And this happened to us when we were younger people, but some of us learned to talk shit and not get verbally bullied. Some of us learned to be funny or witty and clever, and some of us learned to fight. And when that happened, we became less of a target, as maybe some of you have. Now, I don't think any young person should be pushed to the point of their spirit and their will to live, their will to live being broken. Nobody wants that for a kid. That's a devastating thing. But here's something to think about. So I was reading an article, I think last week sometime, and the CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control, reports that there's a national epidemic of mental health stemming from various things like genetic issues, environmental issues, but some of those issues are also social issues. And supposedly, it, like right now in 2019, it's worse since World War II. And Generation Z, and I think that's anybody being born, I'm going to say between 1995 and 2015, is supposedly a high risk group. So when you're talking about, millennials, Gen X, these Generation Z is the most at risk group. And outside of prescribed medication, I'm not really sure what recourse we have for the genetic issues or the environmental issues with our air being polluted and our food sources and whatnot that lead to mental illness. But I think for the social component, there's something like actionable. There's something we can do through child rearing. That's with the parents and the extended family. So when we're looking at what the misconnection is, I think is happening. I think for parents and extended family, now that I mentioned, I think the coddling of younger people is being confused with proper nurturing. It's being confused with proper child rearing and just being a child's protector. And I think these are, I'm going to say there are those that believe like it's a parental duty to sort of pave the way for your child at all costs, and in what can be a sometimes unfair and cruel world. But I think if we reconnect the dots more intelligently, there are some of us that don't like what I'm going to call, what I would call it like a social nosedive or a decline our country has taken in recent years. I mean, look, we're great in a lot of ways here in the U.S., which is why so many immigrants want to come here. But let me write a quick little reality check. We are not, as a nation, number one in a lot of areas the way we want to think we are. And if you check any legitimate data from any reputable report published by the UN, the World Bank, or the World Health Organization, or the OECD, I'm not going to nerd out with throwing numbers out there, but look at things like overall prosperity and healthcare and STEM education and so on and so forth. So with future generations, some of us, be it parenting, mentoring, coaching, etc., like a lot of us, I think, are consciously trying to rebuild this nation one brick at a time. It's very difficult to build any structure with a fucking roll of toilet paper. So you guess which object is the soft kid, the brick or the toilet paper? Like, you need solid materials to build any structure for it to be structurally sound. And granted, everybody won't be a physical specimen or like a world-class athlete, and that's okay. We don't need that from everybody. But that's not to say that you can't do things to develop a young, resilient, and mentally tough young man or woman. So let me clarify what I think the overall problem is with softer kids. Softer, fragile people are a drain on societal systems. They're a drain on their parents, they're a drain on coworkers, they're a drain on friends, etc., etc. It may sound like an ugly thing to say, but chances are some people like that, right? They become less desirable friends, less desirable employees, less desirable mates. And anecdotally, many of us know people that crumble in the face of like a breakup, or they wilt more easily during pressure, or I guess high pressure situations. Softer people tend to be low performers in crisis. That's just how it is. And quality men and women will, more often than not, plant roots with a steady person versus someone who is very fragile, right? So if you're a parent, kind of think about yourself in your advanced years when you need somebody to stand tall for you as an advocate if your health is failing or otherwise. It's a tall order to expect a very delicate, fragile person to miraculously be a stabilizing force for you after they've spent decades not being that very thing. And in terms of consequences, I don't think, like societally, that a storm is coming. I think the storm is here, and the storm is only growing. And we see it as a consequence with this hypersensitivity to language in college campuses. We see it as a consequence and a backlash with what's happening politically on the far right. Jobs like cashiers, truck drivers, and retail as we know it are going away thanks to companies like Amazon. Like, those jobs are disappearing and they're not coming back. So what I guess why I bring that up is everybody needs to learn to stand taller and stronger. So do your kids a favor. So in terms of a solution, I like what a gentleman said. I want to say it was about 5 years ago. I heard an interview on NPR, and this gentleman was a music conductor, and he said conducting an orchestra is like holding a canary in your hand. You squeeze it too hard and you crush it. You hold it too loose and it flies away. So I think with parenting, it's kind of that fine balance, or a delicate balance, like the music conductor, like giving these kids a healthy mix of appropriate nurturing, but also allowing them to familiarize themselves with life challenges. So I think as a parent, it starts with you, obviously. Like, you have to model toughness through your behavior. I mean, some of you aren't physically imposing, and you don't have to be, and it doesn't mean you can't model a mentally tough mindset through strong work ethic and structure. And then you gotta let your child suffer, man. You gotta let your kid go through some shit. These are necessary, or I guess there are necessary interventions for parents when kids are like ill or when they need a little push here and there. But you can't be like fucking Batman and crash through the window to save them at every turn. They need to experience age-appropriate disappointment and age-appropriate challenges, along with discomfort academically and athletically and socially. They have to incrementally build that scarred tissue where they're not repeatedly devastated by every little disappointment as if the stock market crashed. And you have to correct that whiny, entitled behavior. I saw a woman and her son this afternoon in the grocery store, and the kid became a disruptive force. He was making a scene, he was whining, and this little guy was about 11 years old. And this woman just continued to coddle him. And I know parents that are great at this task of imposing structure and boundaries. Like, they're great at it. And I know some that pretty much suck at it. And the good parents are like snipers on a rooftop, and they pick it off. They pick that whiny, doughy, Charmin soft behavior off more often than not. And as a result, their kids are generally a pleasure to be around with other adults and kids. And then there's merit. Like, there's obvious things you have to provide for your kid. Roof over their head, health care, clothing, education, 3 square meals. I like the idea of merit because it gives the kid a sense of responsibility, earning treats, earning privilege, earning an allowance, so on and so forth. And I think the last thing I would recommend is, like, let the appropriate people help you to raise your kids. Like, don't handcuff those who genuinely want the best for your children, like their teachers, their coaches, their relatives, and extended family. It sounds cliche. We've said it. It's been said thousands and thousands of times. It really and truly does take a village to raise a child. It's a practice that works. So that's all I got today. Same spiel. Comments, questions, complaints, ideas for an episode. The email is info@themisconnected.com. The platform, if you want to share with your friends, encourage them to listen in, subscribe. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Google, even on YouTube. The Twitter handle is Misconnected letter P. Instagram, the handle is the Misconnected Podcast. We're also on Patreon. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.